CNN's Mano Raju live on Capitol Hill. Mano, help us understand the scope of this. The Democrats want documents from so many people. What's the goal?
Yeah, it's a breathtaking in scope. Virtually everybody connected to the president in some aspect. People in his business world, like Alan Weisselberg, longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. Ronna Graff, who is a longtime gatekeeper of the president from the Trump Organization. His sons, Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., his son-in-law, and former senior White House advisor Jared Kushner. People who used to work at the White House, like Hope Hicks, the former communications director, among many, many others. They're trying to look into all aspects, controversies that have not been fully investigated by Congress, but they may very well have been investigated by other entities, namely the special counsel, Robert Mueller, as well as the Southern District of New York, the attorneys there who have been, of course, led to the guilty plea of Michael Cohen, who implicated the president in 2 crimes involving the alleged hush money payments of women who are about to come forward with their stories of those alleged affairs involving the president. They want to look into that aspect as well, including a letter they sent to David Pecker, who's the chairman of the parent company for the National Enquirer, to learn about the extent of their efforts to cover up some of those stories in the run-up to the 2016 campaign. They want to keep this going for weeks and months. Expect potentially public hearings. I talked to a committee aide this morning, John, who said that we're talking about weeks, not months, in terms of having hearings potentially in public. They want to be as, quote, transparent as possible, they're saying. And they've also had discussions with the Southern District of New York and with Mueller's team about the scope of this document request. And they've been essentially green-lighted to move forward. So essentially, John, this is going to continue for some time in a very, very aggressive investigation involving this very one committee. Of course, there's several others doing different aspects, but this is going to touch on almost every aspect and controversy that has emerged over the last 2 years. John.
And we know from those last 2 years what the president thinks when you start asking about his businesses and the like, including his children. Mano Raju, appreciate the live reporting off the Hill. With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, Eliana Johnson with Politico, Jackie Kucinich with the Daily Beast, Tolu Olorunnipa with the Washington Post, and Julie Hirschfeld-Davis with the New York Times. I just want to ask the control room to put the list up here again, just to put it up on the screens. These are some of the people who received a document request. Just some of the people: Donald Trump Jr., Alan Weisselberg, Brad Parscale, Don McGahn, Jared Kushner, Jay Sekulow, Jeff Sessions, Julian Assange, Ronna Graff, Tom Barrack. This is anybody who's had anything to do with the president about just about anything. So the Democrats have this power. They say the Republicans ignored aggressive oversight for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, and they're going to do it. This also tells you it's March 2019. Some document fights, weeks and months of hearings. This is going to carry on throughout the year.
I think that's absolutely true. This is an extremely ambitious list of witnesses, and it shows that the Democrats are not confining themselves to the things that have occurred the past 2 years in the White House. They're going after the president's decades-long career in business, and that's where he's far more vulnerable, because White House counsel's office cannot assert executive privilege over any of that. The president, Democrats are very free to go after that, and the president has far lower protections in terms of what his lawyers can do to block Democrats from digging into that. I think the question is, will Democrats be able to focus their inquiries on, a few discrete things that will pack a sort of public punch and really break through to the public? Republicans aggressively invested the Obama investigation, but if you ask people, what were the things that they were able to really land, there weren't many. That either could be because Republicans were inept at it or because there wasn't much corruption, but I think Republicans didn't do a particularly good job. So now the onus is on the Democrats. The
question is, can they meet the challenge, and can they maintain their credibility as oversight agents, or does this become perceived? Republicans will say it out of the box, the president will say it out of the box, but in the wide swath of Americans who aren't caught up in the instant polarization, can they maintain their credibility as in search of facts or in search of a scalp, would be the question.
I think that depends on how they go about it. And right now, there's a line that particularly leaders are trying to walk, not going full impeachment and just saying that they're working on their oversight duties. Now, and that is actually is going to extend into the 2020 race. How that is messaged, how senators are playing into this, and how, if they can have a cohesive message going into and out of these investigations, because you're right, the president is going to use the threat of impeachment on the campaign trail, whether or not it comes true. So how they talk about this and how they go about it is really going to be a big test for Democrats across the board.
And we've seen previous administrations that have gone through this type of investigation. They've set up, war rooms. They've had communications aides, and really strategized how to take this on. We don't really see that out of this White House, but you do have President Trump, who has been sort of masterful in using the bully pulpit to change the national conversation, and you can expect him to really be out there trying to say that, all these Democrats are really trying to do is do presidential harassment. And Democrats have to figure out how to play in this new media world that President Trump has been playing in for the last 2 years. And I'm not sure they're there yet, but I think they're going to have to learn very quickly, because President Trump does not play by the rules of the old days. He plays by very new rules, and he's not sort of stricken by the rules of political decorum. And I think from the CPAC speech that he gave over the weekend, you can expect him to really pull out all the stops in fighting back against Democratic investigation.
You raise a great, interesting point, especially if you connect it to your point about the Trump organization cannot be shielded, the Trump campaign cannot be shielded from executive privilege. So the document request, the initial response, Sarah Sanders releasing a statement saying the White House is going to look at this. It was a very calm, short statement saying we're going to take a look at this. The counsel's office will look at it. We'll decide how to proceed. But we do know when Don McGahn, the former White House counsel, is on this list, they want documents from him. The new White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, in part was brought in because they anticipated this.
Right.
They expected to have 2 years of combat with the new Democratic majority. The question is, how much will he say, here you go, and how much will he say, no way?
Well, and they're casting such a wide net. I think you mentioned 81 different agencies or individuals, and again, not just confined to President Trump as president or his campaign transition, but also to his decades in the private sector. The fact that Rona Graff, the person who literally fields all his telephone calls at the Trump organization, is on this list, really tells you how deeply they want to delve. Now, the White House, I think, anticipating this, it's kind of interesting that they're not saying right off the bat, well, this is ridiculous, this is, it's a fishing expedition, that they're actually saying we're going to take it seriously, we're going to see what we, should do with this. I think you have to imagine they're going to provide some of the material that they're asking for, particularly some of the officials like the former White House counsel. They may feel like they have to provide some of that, but I would anticipate that they're going to push back on a lot of it, and particularly where the president's family is concerned, where his business is concerned. I think there's going to be a lot of effort on the part of the president himself and an effort by Cipollone to try to facilitate limiting that as much as possible. And I think that's going to be where you see some of the biggest fights here.
And Michael Cohen gave them plenty of leads. The question is, to the points that's been made, is how do they want to focus here? Do they want to just go at the security clearance issue, or do they want to go at what Chairman Nadler says he just sees as abuse of power and corruption sort of writ large, and the other things that trickle beneath that? How do they go at it? And as they do, one of the questions is, you have a new Democratic majority. Most of the leadership says, go slow, wait for Mueller, wait for the Southern District of New York, let's have months of our own hearings, and then see where that gets us. But you do have this bubbling anti-Trump impeachment animus bubbling up. Just listen, this is Ted Deutsch, one of those saying, let's try to go slow, but just listen to this conversation with my colleague John Berman this morning.
To what end? You will try to find this out to do what?
Well, to enforce the rule of law, to make sure that no one is above the law. Look,
what is the only way to
enforce
enforce the rule of law and to make sure that no one is above the rule of law when you're talking about the President of the United States?
Well, it's the President of the United States and everyone around him. And I'll anticipate your question, I guess you're hinting at, which is the question of impeachment.
It is the question in the venue of if these committees come up with what at least the Democrats believe is evidence of wrongdoing. That is their only avenue as members of Congress. I suppose they could say, maybe the Southern District of New York should look at this or look at that. But those investigations are separate. That's the genie that Democrats might have to keep in the bottle here if they do develop facts.
Yeah, and that's what I do think will be, Democrats are already contending with it from the left flank of their party, who think we've seen more than enough evidence that this president has committed impeachable offenses. But as they barrel forward, given that the president's business practices are probably they're most likely to get information on those things, I think they could confront a scenario in which they ask the question, okay, is it an impeachable, should we impeach a president for acts he committed before he was sworn into office? I think the closest parallel is probably Whitewater, where there was an investigation of acts that the Clintons, misuse of finances the Clintons committed before they ever got to office. That obviously led to Monica Lewinsky and went off in a different direction, but that does seem like the closest parallel here.
But they also, they're running out of runway on this question of impeachment too, because the 2020 election isn't that far away. These things take time. There are legal challenges. There are all sorts of hurdles, and to put the country through this right before a presidential election or going into a presidential election. Clinton's impeachment was in the second term, right. Remember, when the voters didn't have a chance to decide on him again. So that also is a question that Democrats are facing going into this. Not that would stop anything, but it is a consideration.
Well, and there's an open question whether they'd even be there by the time
right.
of the campaign. I mean, this is a lot of documents, a lot of interviews, a lot of potential subpoenas that they might have to try to enforce. You hear Jerry Nadler talking about building a record, right? They may not have anywhere near the amount of items in that record that they need to make a decision about whether they're going to pursue impeachment or not by the time the 2020 election is here.